Hey, everybody, welcome to the Faith and Fandom podcast, which you're finding here on the Love Thy Nerd Network first, where you can find other podcasts across the board from various on playing video games to life and ministry and culture to the Bible Thump to the pull list. There's a lot going on the Love Thy Nerd Network, so make sure you check those out, and you'll hear this here first, at least a month early before you hear it anywhere else. So thank you for joining in with us today. And today I am joined by a friend, Jenny WILBURN. And I feel like I'm always afraid as soon as I say somebody's name, it's like, did I just say their name wrong? And like I always like have that whole subconscious panic moment.
No, you said it
But
right.
I know like in my mind, I was like, I know I said that right. But dang it, I was like, for that just a second, I was like, I just said their name wrong. Um, I if I'm not mistaken, I've known you for about 14 years now.
Sure, that sounds right.
Um, um,
2009-ish?
yeah,
How long ago was that?
yeah, that's 25 or 15 years now. Uh, and I'll just say this, that our connection is proof that media mail works. I first got in touch with you and the ministry that I met you through because you guys mailed out. Um, Jenny was formerly a part of a ministry called Ground Zero, which is a youth and or children, youth and teen outreach organization in the Myrtle Beach area. Fair description? Yeah.
Sure. I would say teenager,
Just
probably
teenager.
not
Okay.
children.
I
Yeah.
couldn't remember. I was like, I knew you guys did something with school, with
Middle and high school is
middle and
the
high school.
focus there. And I'm no longer there. I left in 2016,
Yeah, I
but
was gonna say like formerly,
check
part of
out
it.
the website to see what they're doing now.
GroundZeroMB.com.
I think
Um,
it's mygroundzero.com.
okay. I don't know. No, I didn't work there. Um, but you guys had mailed out a calendar, like a big wall calendar that had random
Oh
dates.
yeah, yeah, that was the youth pastor calendar.
Yeah,
And it was a huge poster.
it was a huge poster.
It was.
It had like free donut day, or National Donut Day, National Bubble Wrap Day, stuff like that. And I literally got that my first week as a full-time paid youth pastor.
I love that.
And so I sat down in my little closet of a desk area and opened that thing up, and I was like, and I pulled it. I was like, okay, I'm gonna start going to all this. And like
And you
literally
did.
I did the thing, ended up doing like years of missions trips and
Yeah, because you brought your college students down to help with the building renovations. I remember all of that.
yeah, and would show up for the youth pastor pizza lunches.
Oh,
and
yeah.
and it was like people were like, why are you driving an hour and a half for pizza? And I'm like, I don't know.
Because we were awesome.
Y'all are awesome, and there weren't other people doing anything like that. But I was like, literally every connection I've had from, you know, college students doing ministry there to getting handcuffed by the police at Chapin Park for feeding the homeless, to all the stuff that I've had happen through Ground Zero, and those connections happened because y'all sent out a mailer.
That's
So
crazy. That's crazy. I don't know. 15 years later, does that still work? Probably, because nobody gets mail that's things they want anymore. It's all trash.
yeah, and that's the thing. Like, I don't even check our mailbox anymore because if it's not a package on my porch, I let my 10-year-old check the mail. Um, but yeah, and I know we're gonna get into a little bit more, but also for just I don't know if I told you this or we've talked about before. Uh, Jay's podcast was the first podcast I ever did.
Oh, really?
Jay had me come out to y'all's house,
I do
and,
remember you coming out for that. Matters
and
of Faith was his podcast name. Yeah.
yeah, and I that was the first podcast I ever recorded.
That's
Um,
awesome.
so I just thought that was neat when I was thinking about
Well,
this.
it's interesting. I know your listeners don't know this yet, so I'm just going to go ahead and say it. But Jay passed away about a year and a half ago. And so um, I'm trying to figure out kind of what to do with all of his things. He was a writer, he was a podcaster, he did live streaming and things like that. And his podcast is currently not available online. So I'm just throwing this out there because you've mentioned the episode. He had put a few of them up on YouTube, like in later months or recent months before he passed away. And I still have all of the episodes. And so I'm working on. I haven't put it all together yet, but re-releasing all of them so that they're available. Because he did a podcast. It was called Matters of Faith, and he spoke to people of all different faiths. While he was a Christian himself, he felt like there was benefit in hearing everybody's story, and it was a really interesting podcast. I mean, he talked to a lot of people that were Christian. He had a lot of episodes where he spoke himself alone without anyone. And he spoke about his faith and his thoughts on things. And it's been very healing for me to be able to have those and still hear his voice and hear his thoughts on things. So I don't know when you'll be able to find them online again, but if you're interested, they're coming one day. One day, maybe by the end of this year, I'll get it done.
And if you're listening or watching and you're saying, well, why specifically is Jenny here? Jenny is not only a former ministry partner, but Jenny is a parent of teens,
Yep.
and and lovingly saying like geeky teens. And it's one of their graduations today.
Yes, we love Dungeons and Dragons in this house. We love, what else do we love? Oh, video games,
And
uh,
uh, and
all of it.
if you guys have listened to the podcast or anything or seen me post about it, Jenny is the one who coordinated the opportunity to do the Legend of Zelda prom.
Oh
Uh,
yeah, that's right. Look at
I
all these things I forgot I did.
Yeah, she helped coordinate a Legend of Zelda prom that I DJ'd last year,
Yeah,
and
it was last year.
but aside from that, Jenny's uh yeah, is there's the terminology of like how do I phrase that? Jenny's husband Jay, who has
Yes,
passed,
yes,
um also was a very prolific horror writer.
he
Um
was. And I didn't read any of it because I don't do horror, but I loved him and supported him.
So outside of like being connected in ministry with Jenny, I've also spent a few events where I was a artist vendor in the same space of Jay when he was doing horror things specifically. And
That's right too. You guys did XCon, I think. Is
yeah, we
that the
did
one that you
XCOM
did in
together.
Myrtle Beach? Yeah.
Yeah. So I was also a vendor with, Jay in those areas. So it was interesting in that space. So Jay was a prolific horror writer amongst the podcasting things and everything else. And but it's been you said a year and a half.
Yeah, it was October of 2022. So
October,
we're right
October.
at, I guess it's a year and 7 months tomorrow. Holy cow.
Yeah. And so you lost your spouse in that way. So really wanted to talk to you. Not only was like Jay, geeky and the professional of writing and things like that, but your journey of what the loss has been like for you and everything else. But how many books did Jay put out? Do you?
I have no idea. He was a teacher in middle school, and elementary school for I was thinking about this the other day. I think it was 16 years, somewhere between 15 and 20. I think it was 16 though. So he taught for years and always had been interested in writing and kind of dabbled in it, but didn't really put a whole lot out for the public to see. And so it started with him doing short stories and submitting short stories for collections and anthologies. And he ended up getting one of his short stories published in Best Horror of the Year, that was edited by, what's her name? Ellen something. People who are horror writers are probably so mad I don't know her name. They probably yelled out her last name. But it was volume 5, I believe, was the one that he was in. And it's almost like that caused him to go, oh my gosh, I can do this. I can really do this. And so he did a lot of short stories. So there's tons of collections that he's in. And then he's written novels and he's written short stories and he's written stories for children and he's written stories for teenagers, because of his teaching background. One of the reasons that he wrote one of the children's series, which is called Lake Scatterwood, is because our son was a struggling reader and he wanted things that were more exciting than what he could read on his reading level. And so Jay kind of put together that series specifically for our son and
He,
then just kept writing them. So there's
he,
several, I think there's 4 of those, and he was working on more of them. I think there's at least one more story that didn't get published from that, and that's another thing to have to go through when your spouse is a writer. or I guess any creative, there's unfinished work. There's always going to be unfinished work. And he was working, his productivity, even though his health was not great, his productivity was insane. I can't believe what he worked on and what he did, even during a time when his health was not great. But he had two novels in the works on his computer. Like after he had passed away, and I went into his office to kind of figure things out, there were two full novels that he was at least three-fourths of the way through, that were open on his computer. So he would work on one and then work on the other and all that. So, um, your question was, how many does he have? What I know is that he kept a copy of everything he was in because he would get contributor copies of things. And then he has books up on Amazon, so he would get copies of those, of the ones he self-published. I bought a bookshelf that has like closing doors on it to keep
Hmm.
all of those, and the bookshelf is completely full, and it's about a 5 foot tall bookshelf, 3 feet wide,
I remember seeing a picture of
travel
it, and I
shelf.
was like, that's a lot.
It's a lot. It's just a lot.
So like you've been through a lot in the last couple of years. And Jay, it wasn't like just a sudden passing. You had health issues and concerns leading up to that. And now, you also host a podcast kind of dealing with some of that stuff, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But what was the process like for you from like, you know, the health issues beginning to leading up to where you are now? Like, what's that been like for your journey?
Uh, it's been, I don't know, as you say, journey. It's all been a journey.
Yeah.
Jay and I met when I was 18, so I've been with him my whole adult life. I grew up with him. And we knew early on in our marriage that he had a genetic disorder with his kidneys. And he was still healthy at the time, but we were told, prepare yourself. This is coming, and his kidneys will fail at some point. So that brought a lot of darkness to Jay, which I think is why he and horror went well together, because the darkness of horror and finding the light in horror and the darkness, um, just worked with his brain so well on what he was experiencing in life, with a disease that he knew that eventually was going to cause his kidneys to quit working. And again, it's a genetic disease, so he watched his dad and his brother and countless other family members struggle with it, and some of them have passed away, some of them have not. And so he was a little more on the, I always say he was pessimistic. He says he was a realist and that I'm too optimistic. So, um,
I always thought not that you were an odd couple, but like seeing you in ministry capacity and then seeing him in like horror writer capacity and like, in his like during the time of like, when I was first getting to know him, his like social media persona was a little bit darker. And I'm just like,
oh yeah, yeah.
it's like y'all
He
are.
was. He always was. That's just part of who he was. And I think that God really meant for us to be together because we did balance each other out. Because I know my expectations usually are much higher than they should be, and I expect a lot. And like, oh, this is going to be great. It's going to be amazing. And Jay's like, no, wait, hold it down a little bit. And then I would end up disappointed because my expectation of amazing and great didn't happen. Um, but as we grew together, we were married 23 years. It'll be 25 years this year. But unfortunately, he's missed a year and 7 months. but but he just always helped me to kind of come back to earth a little bit. So even though I would say he was pessimistic early in our marriage, I think as I got older and I have matured, I realized that he probably was more of a realist than I was. So that was interesting to deal with because I always felt like, don't worry about it. When your kidneys fail, we'll figure it out. And there's going to be, medical science is going to be this different place than it is now when you've watched other family members deal with it. And so I was always very positive about it. And I had mentioned that I left the ministry that I met you through in 2016, and a lot of that had to do with health issues. He had hit a point, he wasn't teaching anymore and hadn't been teaching for probably about 5 years at that point, because he couldn't do a full 8 hours in a classroom anymore. And he just, the exhaustion of his kidneys starting to fail because it's a slow process when you're dealing with a genetic disease. And he needed more, I don't want to say caretaking. He could take care of himself, but there were times I was very concerned about him, because kidney disease and failure in your kidneys brings on a whole host of things that you might need to get to the hospital quickly, and you may not be coherent enough to take care of that. And so I've stayed home with him from 2016 and started working from home until he passed in 2022. But he was able to get a kidney transplant in 2017. And that made such a difference in multiple ways for him. Like, not only was his health better, but he also became more thankful and more grateful. And he would tell you, and I agree, that kidney failure was something he needed to go through in order to become more mature and complete, in who he was. Because you can actually see a difference. Like you talk about early on, his social media persona, even though he would be dark and joke still,
Right.
like in 2017, there was kind of this shift that he went from being negative, darker, I guess, to being more encouraging and more um, thankful and grateful for what was going on. And he knows, and I know, that God worked through that situation, even though it wasn't the greatest situation, and it's not anything you wish would happen to you or anyone else that you know or love. But God worked it out in a way that he was able to talk to other people who were struggling with chronic illness, not just kidney disease, but chronic illness in general. And he lived life in a way where he wanted to get as much done as he could with what he had. And he knew, I don't want to, I'm going to say he knew that he didn't have as much time as most people get. I didn't think that. Again, me and my optimism all the time. I'm like, kidney transplant, we got it, we're good. And even though the nurse, when we got the kidney transplant, looked at me and said, this is not a cure, this is a treatment. So there's going to be ongoing treatment for his life. And I thought, yeah, okay, that's fine. You think it's just a treatment. It's a cure for me. Um, and I don't know. That was tough for me because I actually even went through a grieving process after his transplant, even though it was a good time and a positive thing. I had to grieve the fact that my brain thought that he was going to be able to reclaim all those years that we couldn't do things. We couldn't do family vacations. We couldn't uh, do a lot of things that families get to do because of his health and how tired he was and how exhausted he was. And I will say we did get some family vacations in between 2016 and 2022 before COVID hit.
Yeah. Yeah.
COVID hitting was a whole nother thing because his immune system was shot. Um, but it was nice that we were able to do some family vacation things together and kind of reclaim some time, but not the way I guess my brain had hoped. So that part of the journey was tough. And I think anybody who deals with health issues with their spouse, which you know about too, um, it can really, I guess, shake up what you thought your marriage would be, what you thought your family life would be. It's probably more what your family life would be. Especially with your children and the things that you kind of hoped you would do. Or I guess maybe thought you would do, like when they were babies. You had those mindsets of like, we're going to go to the Grand Canyon and do these. I don't know. Maybe you don't do that. That's what I
Oh,
do.
I do. But yeah.
All the dreams or the imagination of what you're going to do with your kids and your spouse. So some of that didn't happen. But I don't know. I wouldn't want to have journeyed with anybody else the last 25 years for sure, even though there were a lot of ups and downs with his health. There's nobody else I would have rather have been beside. So,
So with the process of that, um, of actually losing him in that capacity, what was your response? And yeah, what was your response personally? What was your response as a parent? What did you do in terms of how that affected you?
oh gosh. Well, his death was a surprise to me. He had started having some complications that we didn't quite understand. The doctors didn't quite understand what was going on with him the last couple of months. And it ultimately ended up being a stroke that he had. So his kidneys functioned beautifully all the way to the end. But he ended up having a stroke due to vascular spasms that can be a complication from people that have polycystic kidney disease because their vascular system is more elastic, is what a doctor explained to me, than the standard vascular system. And so complications can happen for people with that genetic disorder. And we weren't really aware. We were aware that aneurysms were a risk, but the amount of strokes that he had from the veins spasming just damaged his brain so much that it wasn't recoverable for him. And so we did have a time period where he was on a ventilator for about 4 or 5 days for us to kind of figure out how bad the damage actually was and if there was any way to come back from it. And so during that time, it gave me time to talk with my children about, what was going to happen because I knew since the doctors had told me that we were going to take him off the ventilator and he wasn't going to make it. So the only thing that I can chalk it up to is that God was with me through the whole thing. I was able to have conversations with my children each night when I got home from the hospital, and they understood where we were. They understood what was going to happen. Um, they were accepting that it was going to happen. Um, and I don't think it's because I'm a great communicator. I really don't think that's what it was. I do think that it was it was totally a supernatural God thing that the words I was able to say and the way my kids were able to receive it um, worked and got them on the same page as to where we needed to be as a family to be able to take the next step of what our lives were going to be. Um, there were a lot of questions about things from the kids. I remember my kids at the time were 11 and 17. And I remember my 11-year-old looking at me and saying, is it just going to be me and you and his brother, just the three of us? And I looked at him and I said, yeah, I guess, yeah. I mean, yeah, I don't, and let me say that we do joke a lot in our family, even around death. And so I actually looked at him and said, I don't have any prospects, so I don't think we're gonna put somebody else, in. Um, he said, I mean, and it's a valid question when you're 11. You grew up with a mom and a dad in your house, and dad's not going to be here anymore. Is there somebody else, And I don't know if he meant it that way or if he meant like a grandparent might move in or,
Right,
whatever.
right.
Um, but that we sat there and laughed, because he knew obviously there wouldn't be somebody else, and that's not really what he meant, but it was funny in the moment. So I do the dark sense of humor that Jay had, his boys definitely have as well. So we've had some laughs that some things I don't even want to share because people would think we're sick, but Jay would have appreciated it. And um, yeah,
Honestly, some of
he
my
would enjoy it.
favorite jokes or like dark moments with my kids are the ones where you can say that and they'll say, "What is wrong with you?" and that you can't say in public or, for
Or you
whatever.
say there's certain people you just don't say it around, you know.
Right. Yeah.
So, yeah, we've definitely had those. And I think that the sense of humor for us has been a big part, I think, in the process of being able to carry something so heavy. Because his death left a huge hole in our family, a huge hole in each of our hearts. And even today, my oldest son is graduating from high school today, and oh, I'm gonna try not to get emotional about it, but that's gonna be tough today. I mean, I'm so proud of him, and he has worked so hard. But the last 2 years, which Jay hasn't been here for most of, he has excelled so much in school. He's got 18 college credits that he's graduating with. Like I can't even,
Holy cow.
I can't, I can't even fathom that from my high school years. He's got a 4.1 GPA. He's actually graduating a year early, and we pulled him out to homeschool him in sixth grade, and because he was struggling so much with reading. And Jay said, "You know what? If I can get him to be excited about reading and excel in reading, he can learn anything and do well in school." And part of me is super sad that Daniel isn't going to get to experience his dad telling him how proud he is of him. I have said, I'm sad he's not here. And this is one of the things that I don't know if it's helpful to listeners. And every person that's going through grief is very different. But one of the things that I struggle with is when I say things like, "I'm sad that Jay won't be here for his graduation." Very well-meaning people will say, "Oh, he knows." I'm like, how do you know he knows? Like, it's hard sometimes, during a death, during a season of loss, during moments like graduation, or big milestone moments for your kids where there are other parents not here. um it's tough to say things out loud and then have people respond to you with something that you don't know for sure, you
That's
know.
that's cookie cutter and even on a spiritual basis, probably bad theology.
Right. Well, yeah, like I don't want to get into theology. What I can say about theology and losing someone super close to you, I can only speak from spousal loss. I did lose my brother 9 years ago, so I can speak from that as well. But I still have my parents. My parents are still here. But you, even though I've never doubted God through any of this. The theology of what I thought things were, and starting to dig back into the scriptures and see what the Bible actually says versus what well-meaning people have said is just, it's wonky.
It's so
Like,
wonky.
that's the best word I can
So
think of to say it. And there's things I don't have the answer to. And I believe, and I'm going to tell you this, I am not a theologian. I did youth ministry for almost 2 decades. Um, and I did it from an administrative standpoint. I did it from being the person that was planning the things. Uh, I We're just not going to know the answers to some stuff some people try to give answers to. We're just not going to know it this side of heaven. We're not.
no,
And it's
that
okay. It's okay not to know. It's
I
okay to not know and still have hope that it's going to be good.
I would rather have a non-answer with hope than a bad answer that I can't trust. And
Right. Right.
and
Like they're up there fishing with grandpa now. What?
oh, it's so bad. So for me, I deep dived into that. Like I worked in youth with before I was a youth pastor. I also ran Camp Grace in Fairmont. And the first year of our ministry with Camp Grace, full time with the camp opening, there was a tragic accident. Um, the directors, the camp director had a 12-year-old son. and he told the 12-year-old son to drive a truck around and pick up trash. And his 2.5-year-old brother ran out in front of him. And so uh he ran over his own brother. And it was one of those, like, in my entire life, I've not blacked out except that day. Um of like being there in that moment, because literally it happened from here to the end of the house, like.
Mhm.
And it was a very traumatic day for everyone. And I can still remember like the screams, everything else, just how everything went down. Um and but I was at that funeral, and one of my least favorite camp speakers ever of ministry period, I'm like,
Is this stuff you want to admit out loud?
Oh, I'll admit it. I ain't scared. Um, uh, but like, I just didn't agree like with a lot of what this guy did in general. But like, it was that thing of at the funeral, he said, "Oh, we know he's up there in heaven, just running around, giving Jesus a dickens of a time." And I'm like, that's not right. Like theologically, I was like, that's garbage. And so like at that point, I went and started, pre-internet, like for real internet, started researching what all scripture says about death, about resurrection, about eschatology, all those things. I just wanted to put it all in one like little neat file. And so like when people have questions, because I'm not gonna walk up and like uh you know, rain on somebody's funeral and be like, "Hey, by the way, that's not accurate." Like,
Right.
I'm not doing that. But guess what? Like when people actually go through stuff, they have genuine questions. And the trite stuff that we say that's not accurate doesn't usually bring a lot of comfort. And so like I'll get people say, "What does the Bible actually teach about this?" And I'll be like, and I'll just slide them the folder like,
You're
here's
like,
some
not honestly, not a lot.
not a lot. I was like, here's some scripture, derive your own understanding of this thing. But I can tell you this, it's not like like you said, fishing with grandpa. I was like, just in terms of like everything else, it's just like, this doesn't track. Do I believe they're in God's hands and it's going to be cool? And that I have hope for all the hope that we're supposed to have? Absolutely. But,
Yes.
but there is no place where theology is more skewed than in terms of death and heaven. And outside of finances, like there's no other place where theology is more skewed than the funeral life. But
Yeah, luckily I don't know. I was kind of numb the day of Jay's funeral, but luckily I don't think anything that was spoken that day was out of touch. But
yeah,
people, I get it. I've been there where I've needed to say, or I felt like I needed to say something to someone who's experienced loss, and it's hard to come up with what to say. Um, I'm sorry is great, but not really. I mean, if you really don't have anything else to say it, I guess. But what's really nice is someone who's experienced loss, had her two children standing next to her while people are walking up and talking after your children's dad has died. The amount of I'm sorry's that you get is just numbing. Like it doesn't hurt. There's not really any damage done with an I'm sorry, but it just feels numb.
it's not doing any good either.
No, but let me share something that is helpful, I think, at least for me. And we'll talk about our podcast later, but the two other people that are on the podcast with me, we have decided that this is one of the best responses is to walk up to somebody and tell them what you loved about that person. Maybe you're somebody who didn't know that person, so you can't really say anything specific about the person, but maybe you saw the relationship between the two people. Somebody walking up to me and saying, "I saw how well you loved him." That means something. Or gosh, Jay was such a loving father. Or, I mean, don't lie if you don't know anything about them because if something's untrue, that's going to feel even odder. So don't come up with something that's not true. But just any kind of observation that you saw about the person that passed, or the relationship between the person that you're speaking to and the person that passed. Those are the things that give you a little warmth, a little a little bit of joy in a moment that um, feels so numb and so terrible. Because it's nice to know that something you were doing and the way that you were living your life, or the way that they lived their life, that other people saw it in them too, if that makes sense. So,
There's a Andy Mineo lyric in a song called "Death Has Died" that says, "I sat and listened to the priest tell lies to appease loved ones in their seats."
mm,
And it's just like, come on, that's like shenanigans. We know better. But that's amazing to be able to say, this is something I saw in you. This is something I loved about that. That's a and realistically, and I'm not saying silence is better, but if you don't have anything to say, your presence is nice. And you don't.
it is. And I'm aware of everybody who came to his service. I'm aware of everybody who sent me a text message, even people who sent me like an emoji heart, you know, it meant something. And I'm thankful for every single one of them. I'm even thankful for all of you that may have spoken words that were a little wonky. Like, I'm still thankful for you. But if you're really looking for a way to uh, reach through the fog and the yuck of loss, uh, think about the idea of sharing something that you've seen in that person, you've seen in their relationship. Maybe the fact that you know that it's going to be hard, admitting the hardness of what's happening is good too. Sometimes people try to talk you out of it. They try to talk you out of being sad. Ooh, you want to know something else that I've really struggled with?
Yes.
And still, oh gosh. Okay, so one of the things that I find odd about losing your spouse, because I have moments like today, I'm okay today. There are some days I want to lay in my bed and not get out of bed even a year and a half later. And it might happen 6 years from now. I might still feel that way on a day. But it's not consistent. But sometimes I'll run into people that sort of knew him well. And it's like they put on, you can feel it coming. Like you're walking towards them and you can feel them being like, oh, time to bring it down. We can't be happy. We can't be happy because she's lost Jay. And I think that people need to understand that for me, I can't speak for every widow on the planet or widower on the planet, but for me, I want to talk about Jay. I want you to bring him up. I want to, I just, as I had posted before on Facebook, he was my favorite person. So why would I just all of a sudden not want to talk about him? Like
That's your post about that. That's why I asked you. Because
so
like
like
I wanted to ask you, and then I was like, maybe I was like, there'll be a time. And then you posted, I was like, okay, cool, it's now.
because it's like this, I don't know. When when you have a loss like that, and then you see somebody maybe you haven't seen in a while, and maybe it's been 6 months since their loss, maybe it's been a year, but you can almost feel the womp womp coming when somebody's walking towards you, that it's like, oh, great. Now we're going to have to act like we're sad now because this person is walking up to me and they seem sad. So now I'm going to have to not pretend to be sad, but allow sadness to come through to be able to deal with whatever they're dealing with, if that makes sense. And maybe it's because I do have a good bit of empathy in me. So what a person brings to the conversation, I will go to, if that makes sense. Not everybody does that, but I do. Um, so it, I'm not saying you need to come to me with like celebration, like, woohoo, here I come to talk to you. But there's just something about when I feel like someone feels like they need to be griefy with me, if that makes sense. Does that make sense?
It does. It does.
And that feels weird. It feels strange. So don't, if you aren't feeling sad about Jay, don't feel like you need to be sad about Jay with me. If that, because I'm sad enough alone.
It's rejoice with those who rejoice, mourn with those who mourn. Don't
Right.
pour
But you
pour
don't
more
have to
mourning.
don't bring mourning to me if I'm in a moment where I'm actually not. Like, take a minute to figure out where I am before we decide to be in a mourning moment because there are days that and I'll be honest with you about where I am. I don't always post about it. And this is something we talked about too on the, actually, we haven't talked about this on the podcast yet, but it might be coming. Um, One of the things that's interesting is trying to, everybody comes out of the woodwork right after a death. So you have, oh, here's all the food, and you have so much food you have to throw it away because there's too much. And then you have people who are like, let me help you with the kids, let me do this, let me do that. And it's like for about a month, maybe. And then all of a sudden you're alone.
Yep.
You're alone. And everybody, and I know everybody else has to move on with their lives, and that's fine. And I have to learn to deal with mine without my person. And that's fine too. But shoot, I wish, the meal trains that everybody sets up. I almost wish that Meal Train had this thing where it was like a 6 month check in. Like, let's check in at 6 months and see if they still need meals. Because I'm telling you, I didn't want to cook. I still don't really want to cook. I just, I just don't. And I have days where I get really excited and I could do it. And I feel good about doing it. And I'll just be like, yay, I'm going to cook and we're going to cook or whatever. But shoot, man, at about 6 months and about a year, um, it was like a running into a brick wall all over again. And the hard part is you don't really want to reach out to people and go, I need help, because you can look and see other people are struggling in their lives too to get stuff together. And it feels weird to say, gosh, if somebody would bring us dinner, this week would feel so much easier. But it was like all your dinners came 6 months ago or a year ago, all in the same week. you know?
Or the same
Uh,
day.
Right, right. And, gift cards for meals are great, but you still have to go get them, at least where we live. We don't have delivery anywhere. Some of you are lucky and have delivery, but anyway, that's one of the things that is interesting. And so I don't put out there all the time that we're struggling. This year between Christmas and about February, those 2 months were so hard. I think those might have been the hardest 2 months I've had so far. But I didn't really talk much about it because when you're in it, you don't know how to talk about it. You don't know how to vocalize it. And then you also feel like you've reached out to people before, like you're safe people that you reach out to. You don't want to overdo it with them, if that makes sense. Um, and so you tend not to. And I guess just check on your people. I have a few people that do that. And unfortunately, the ones that tend to do it the most are the ones that don't even live anywhere near here. So, them coming and taking the kids to go do something fun. So they're not sitting in the house because I can't get out of the house and go do anything. Or people that would bring a meal or whatever. They're just not, here geographically close.
Right.
So, I don't know. It's hard because I think sometimes we put out there that things are going well, that we are thriving, but some days we're not. Some days we're not thriving. And so since some of the things that we put out for social media look like, oh, everything's going great, but then we don't post for 2 months. If we
Right.
disappear for 2 months and the last thing we posted was we're doing great, chances are we're not doing great right now.
Well, I mean,
So,
and I was gonna ask about this too, because like not immediately or well, after, like, not that there's a perfect time, but you took a good chunk of time after Jay's passing to invest in the boys and to go do stuff.
right.
To
Well, we
be
had a Disney trip planned with Jay
mm,
that was supposed to happen a month and a half after he died, and I almost canceled it because I thought, you always hear like, yeah, we won the Super Bowl and we're going to Disney World. Nobody's like, hey, my husband just died and we're going to Disney World. Like nobody says that. So it felt weird to still go. But I had a friend of mine who said, no, you need to go. The boys need it. The boys need it, and you guys need to go. You had planned to go. You made this plan. Like we had made the plan like 2 years before. We were supposed to have gone the year before, but with COVID, we canceled it and pushed it off because Jay wasn't comfortable yet with going and being with other people. And so we ended up going, and it was a long trip because Jay always wanted to pace himself. And we had saved all the money to go when we had already paid for it. And so we did that. And it was hard, but it was cathartic. It was good in a lot of ways, but still hard. Um, that was the trip that I decided. And again, this was in December. He died in October, so it was only 2 months after he had passed away. But I decided to quit wearing my wedding rings on that trip because people on the Disney buses kept asking me about my husband. And I didn't think, well, we're on a Disney trip and I'm going to tell them he's deceased. That just doesn't seem like the conversation you have with, bippity boppity boo playing on the bus with you. So I just decided, you know what? I'm just going to take them off and hopefully we can avoid these conversations about my husband with strangers in the supposed happiest place on earth. So, and I've never put him back on. And again, that's a personal thing for people to choose and decide. But I don't know. You were asking though about other things that I did with the boys, staying active with them too. So
Did you find that was helpful? Like just doing stuff with them? Like, do you feel like it was like reflecting on that? Like, what was the most like? How was that for you, and what was helpful?
I'm going to say during the season that it was necessary. Um, because I had to do something during that season. I couldn't just sit still. So I do remember we went kayaking, we went mountain biking, we did all sorts of things together, even in addition to the Disney trip. And we stayed active, and we have a family that's close to us that we love dearly. That they're very active outdoorsy folks, and so we did a lot of things with them, and that was helpful. But looking back on it, I can see that it was a season of trying to stay busy and not really deal with the grief.
Mm.
But that first year, you're just numb anyway. Everything feels numb, everything feels off, everything feels weird. Um, One thing that was a little different for me than maybe most people have is that Jay's health had been an issue for a few years for us, and especially with COVID and him trying to stay away from germs with his lowered immune system. The boys and I had done a lot of stuff without him. So for me, being out of the house without Jay with the kids kind of made it feel like Jay might still be at the house, if that makes sense. um, so every time we would come back home, it was like being slapped in the face again that he wasn't here.
Mhm.
And so I liked staying out of the house more than I liked being in the house because our family did a lot of stuff together in the house. We play a lot of board games. We read a lot. We do a lot of things together. We watch movies and binge watch TV shows and things like that together. And him not being here because he kind of was a main part of all of that inside our home. Being away from the house felt easier, if that tracks. Yes, it does. It tracks.
It tracks.
So, but I started realizing that every time I would leave and we would go on a trip, I'd have a good time on the trip and I'd come home and this depression would hit me. And it was, I kind of refer to it as the pit. Like I would fall into a pit for a few days and have to get out of it. And uh, some of that was because I wasn't dealing with the grief. I wasn't facing it when I was away from the house. And so when I'd come back home, I'd have to face it, and I didn't want to. So it was a struggle for sure. But I am a big supporter of therapy. So I was seeing a therapist, and she helped me work through a lot of things that I wasn't working through on my own, and that was super helpful. And I've found now, even this past February, I was able to go on a trip to Europe, and it was the first trip that I ended up going on. The kids stayed here; their grandmother came and stayed with them, And it was the first trip that I went on. And when I came back, I didn't feel like I wanted to crawl in a hole. Yeah, I still miss Jay, but I didn't have this days and days of depression after coming back to the house. So uh, I think that's because of all the work that was done to deal with the grief that I may have been avoiding earlier in the grieving process. Because you have to face it. You have to, or it's not going to start to relieve on any level. I really didn't like when people would say it gets better because in my brain, how could anything be better if Jay's not here? But mm, and get better at dealing with it versus the situation necessarily getting better.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that I am maturing and I am finding out who I am because, like I had said earlier, I met Jay when I was 18, and my whole existence as an adult was with him. And we were a good team. He helped me when I didn't have much of a backbone in situations. He would tell me what to not he would tell me what to do. That makes him sound like he was controlling. He was not controlling at all. Um, but he was my sounding board. Um he was my backbone. He would be like, you don't need to put up with this. You need to tell this person that this is over. You're not dealing with that anymore, when I would never tell those things to myself. Um, but the interesting thing is that being with someone in that capacity in a marriage, in a relationship, that even though he's not here, so much of who I am is who he was. And I can still hear his voice in my head when decisions come up that need to be made. And I can confidently say, yeah, Jay would approve of this choice in this situation. Or I can confidently say, Jay could care less which one of these I picked, because we often had that conversation too. He's like, you know what? You can pick A or B. It's your choice. It's your choice. You get to choose that thing. I've got no reason to tell you to pick one over the other. But it's neat to be able to actually still see that no matter how long I live on this earth without him, that he's still part of who I am. He's still part of what makes me me as I'm still discovering who I am by myself.
Mhm. So now you're doing a podcast that's helping you and other people in this
Yes.
process. Let's talk about that.
Okay. So, I have my sister-in-law who lost her husband, my brother, 9 years ago this year. And then I lost Jay a year and a half ago. And my friend Sarah lost her husband 3 weeks after we lost Jay. And so the three of us had been talking and just kind of leaning on each other. And of course, Sarah and I would always ask Terry, who lost her husband years ago, like, should it feel like this? What can we expect from this? So we kept kind of talking to her to find out these things. And we started talking about the idea that if all three of us have to walk this road without our spouses, that maybe our story and our journey is something that can benefit other people. So we decided to start a podcast. We aren't great at it. It's a little baby podcast. We're just getting started. So we started in January and it's called Go Get a Snack. And we have debated changing the title because how many people know Go Get a Snack has anything to do with widowhood? Probably none. But the reason we named it that is one, we are obsessed with snacks and finding the best snacks. And Sarah is particularly picky about what you do and don't do with certain snacks, including popcorn. Um, and it's always just been a funny joke between us. But as parents, we also have learned that when our kids get really grouchy and get really emotional, if we say, you know what, time out, we just need to go get a snack. So that's kind of where the idea came from for us, is that when things get overwhelming in our lives, we just mentally tell ourselves, maybe we need to go get a snack. And it's biblical too, you know?
I was about to say that's, when I knew what the podcast was about, I was like, okay, this is the prophet taking a nap and getting a
That's
snack.
right.
Got it.
You
Okay.
just need a nap and a snack when things get overwhelming. So we've decided that we don't care if people totally understand that that's what the podcast is about from the title. We're hoping maybe we can educate people on it. But then we don't know that it matters. You could just choose to listen to us or not. But our hope is that we can be people that can talk about spousal loss, um, and widowhood, which we hate the word widow. And we have tried to come up with another word, but things like dowager, that doesn't, that's not a great word
It's,
either.
it's, it's it makes me think of Downton Abbey, but past that,
Yes, it does. um, so anyway, we can't come up with a better word for it. So we're just going to call ourselves widows, even though we don't like it. Um, we did look it up online one time for synonyms, and one of them said dead man's wife. It's like,
Yikes.
it's not untrue, but anyway, so we hope that our podcast would be something for people who have lost a spouse, but we also hope it'll be something for people who want to walk with people who have lost a spouse. And Sarah, the one of the last episodes we did recently, Sarah actually made the comment, if you haven't lost your spouse or you don't know anyone who has lost their spouse, just wait. So I said, wow, that is really strong there, Sarah. And she goes, but it's not untrue. It's not untrue. All of us, if you don't know someone now, someday you will.
Uh,
Because none of us make it out alive, right? From this earth. We
there's there's
go.
the HBO series Watchmen, like the sequel series to the Watchmen story. And there's a line in there that's like always stuck with me since I watched it. It's the Dr. Manhattan says, by definition, don't all relationships end in tragedy.
Mm,
It's
so true.
like regardless of how it ends, they all end in tragedy. And it's just
They do. They
okay,
do.
yeah, yeah,
Well, and I was going to share this earlier, but I'll share it now. But one of the scriptures that really irked me right after Jay died was when Jesus was talking to the religious leaders who were like, so who are we going to be married to when we get to heaven? And, of course, they're asking about multiple wives, so what they're asking really isn't, something Jesus is going to waste his time on answering really
right,
anyway.
yeah,
But his wording, depending on which translation you look at, basically says, all of you down here are so concerned about marriage, and it's just not a big deal up there, or not up there, but in heaven.
yeah.
And I got so angry because I thought, holy cow, I have worked so hard on my marriage. Jay and I worked so hard, and it doesn't even matter. But I've kind of gotten over being angry about that because I now realize that's not totally the point of what was being talked about. But
Right.
still,
Well, I there's a one of my best friends, like they were doing a Francis Chan Bible study on marriage, and like that's like the second chapter is like your marriage doesn't matter eternity or something to that effect.
do you
Um,
know that the first book I read after Jay died was that book?
oh, shut
Why
up.
would I read a marriage book after Jay
Oh,
died?
oh
I
my
just
gosh.
decided I needed to know more about what I didn't know while I was married. The grief brain is weird. That's all I'm going to say.
Uh,
I absolutely refused to read anything about grief because I've never been diagnosed with a defiant disorder, but I do believe there's this defiance in me that if somebody says, oh, here's everything you need to know about this thing, I'm like, you don't know nothing. I
you,
don't want to know
you
what you
can't
think
tell
I
me
need to
what I
know.
need. Yeah.
Right. So, so now we're having a podcast where we're talking about what you need to know. And I would probably not listen to it either.
I I don't think most podcasters would listen to their own podcasts.
I do because I edit ours. So,
But like my friend that was like, they were in their first 10 years of marriage, and read that book. They're like, and the wife was literally like, if I'm not married to you in heaven, I'm not doing this. It's like, this isn't worth it. It's not eternal. She's like, ugh. And like,
Well,
so
you know what I do love about that book? And I think this was something that, because the first chapter talks about the idea of being married and the idea of preparing for eternity together. And that's so beautiful because
yeah,
really that's that's what marriage is. I mean, it's really about the two of you preparing for eternity together. And I think totally differently about all my relationships that way. I think about my parenting relationship differently after reading that chapter. And even though I didn't get a chance to read it while Jay was here, um, I think we did that. Not because someone told us to, but because that's what we believed marriage was about. It was about holding each other's hands and walking through all the stuff, knowing that there's an eternity on the other side of it. And even though I would still love to be walking with him and holding his hand here, uh, I I know that we did what we were supposed to do together in preparing for eternity. So I hope that all of my relationships here still carry that and echo that in some way, whether it be friendships or my parenting relationship with my kids and um, just pointing to Jesus through all of it. And we struggle with some things on our podcast faith wise. Sometimes we actually even tried to record a podcast about faith or faith after our loss, and we kind of gave up. We recorded a whole 45 minutes and we're like, none of that's usable. It's such a mess because trying to process your faith out loud after you've experienced a loss like that, it's you don't want people to get the wrong opinion of what you think about God because I still trust God even when I can say out loud I struggle with understanding all the things. Um, but you talk about it for 45 minutes with your two friends that have also lost their spouse, and it can get a little jumbled.
yeah, it can get saucy in there.
So, yeah. So one day we might approach that again, but it may be a little too early for us to do that.
So if people want to check out your podcast, where would they go?
It is on Spotify. Go get a snack. And you can also find it on Apple Podcasts. I think those are the two places that it is. I don't know if Spotify pops it out to other places other than that, but I know those are the two places that it is currently. And we're talking about putting it on YouTube because we hear that's a thing we're supposed to do. We're
It
learning as we go.
it is. And it may not be your biggest audience at first, but it's one of those places that has like endurance of like people finding stuff later.
Right,
So
right. So that's where we are. And we're learning. We actually started in January and had to take a hiatus because I went out of town. Sarah had to have surgery. We had just several things happen over 2 or 3 months. And so we're back now. And we have some really cool plans for the summer. I'm actually really excited about our plans for the summer. We're going to focus on self care. We're calling it self care summer. And so we're going to talk about different aspects of taking care of yourself. Um, each episode. We haven't hashed it out completely yet, but we're getting together at the end of this month to figure all that out. So I we're hoping to share. You know how there's some of the you did one of these a long time ago. Do you remember like the here's a list of 5 things you do every day to be healthier or whatever?
yeah,
It's
yeah,
like
yeah,
drink a gallon of water, run 400 miles, or whatever the things are that you do. Read 47 pages out of a book every other day or whatever.
yeah.
I don't know what they are. So we've decided that we're going to put together a list of 7 things that are simple to do, but when you're in depression, you're in struggle, that they're not, they're hard to do, but they're simple things. And so when you find yourself in this depressive state or in this not such a good state mentally, that if you can just get up and say, okay, today I'm going to do this one thing, that it can help. And then the next day you could be like, okay, so I did that one thing. Today I can do that one thing again. Okay, maybe I could do the second thing with the first thing this day. So just the idea of kind of building on being able to get out of one of those episodes of being in a pit, I guess. And again, we're still developing it, and maybe I shouldn't have said anything yet
Hey,
because
no,
we're not there.
it's a
Um,
good start talk.
but that's what you can expect from us this summer. And even though we do focus on loss, I do think self-care is super important, and it's not selfish. It's really not. I used to think it was, and as being a caregiver, it's tough to take care of someone and yourself. But it's really important because if we don't take care of what God gave us, then we aren't going to be here to do the other things. So I personally want my body to last as long as it possibly can here to do all the things God's called me to do. So taking care of myself is pretty important.
Yeah. Well, Jenny, thank you for taking time on a day where you also have other million important things going on.
Just one big one. He's graduating, and I need to leave in 15 minutes to take
Yep.
him.
Um, so is there before we go, anything else you want to leave people with? Any you don't have to, just like want to make sure I'm giving you any.
I don't know. Take care of yourself and love everybody around you.
Sounds great. Um, everybody, thank you for taking time to listen. Make sure you check out Jenny's podcast on Apple or Spotify. Go get a snack. And we're excited to be part of the Love Thy Nerd Network and what's going on there with these things. Also to announce that Love Thy Nerd content is now featured on the Glue network on your TV. So if you have a Roku or any device like that that can stream it, the GLU network focuses on the intersection of faith and pop culture and things of that nature and encouraging material. And you'll be able to find this podcast there along with a lot of other Love Thy Nerd content. And this will also, you'll be able to find it a little bit later on Faith and Fandom as well. So, Jenny, thank you for taking the time to hang out with us today and share your story.
It was my pleasure.
And I hope you have a great graduation. Tell the boys I said hey.
I'll do it.
All right. Hey, everybody, have a great day.